Underneath the usual pace of things, something rare just unfolded. Quietly, decisively, and without fanfare. Two celestial pulses crossed paths in a way that the sky won't replicate for years. A new moon, already known for closing cycles and inviting the unknown, met a force older than memory, the karmic clock of Saturn turning over. It isn't just astronomy, it's a reset coded into the rhythm of existence. The darkest night didn't arrive empty, it arrived carrying a mirror, not to show a reflection, but to test what hides in the unseen. And strangely, everything that's been delayed, every consequence postponed, starts to line up like it never forgot the schedule. That convergence is not meant to be loud. It moves like breath held at the bottom of the ocean. The effect isn't chaos, it's stillness with weight. Decisions that felt small now vibrate with unseen outcomes. Do you ever wonder why some moments echo louder than others, even when nothing seems to happen? That's this kind of silence. It's the pause before the world inhales again. Not everything shifts with fire or thunder. Some of the most permanent changes sneak in through the cracks, rewiring direction without announcing themselves. That's the strangeness of today. It didn't come to be understood. It came to be noticed, before it's too late to ask what just changed. What's coming next might just be the missing piece you didn't know you were looking for. Hit subscribe, because the next message wasn't meant to be missed. Something just shifted beneath the framework of ordinary time, so subtly that most won't realize the walls moved until they no longer line up. This isn't about astronomy charts or planetary mechanics. It's the reanimation of an ancient principle, an invisible force that doesn't govern by thunder, but by tally. Every step, every echo, every forgotten gesture finds its place on an unseen ledger. That's what returned today. Not the orbiting sphere, but the archetypal pulse that quietly monitors cause and consequence. When this presence rises in sync with a darkened moon, the effect isn't loud, but it's irreversible. Cycles reset, debts surface, quiet reckonings take form. It isn't punishment, it isn't reward, it's alignment. Think of it less like a courtroom and more like a tuning fork, something that exposes disharmony by simply vibrating with truth. And now even the tiniest misstep hums louder in the silence. Has anything recently resurfaced in your world that you thought was finished? That's not coincidence, it's design. What seems like bad luck or sudden clarity might actually be balance returning to its rightful shape. There's something strange about this kind of order. It doesn't ask permission, and it doesn't need applause. It just arrives when the hour demands it. And if this doesn't feel like that kind of moment, when will it? Some days arrive dressed like any other, but carry the weight of a sealed envelope. Quiet, yet undeniably personal. Today, something subtle threaded its way through ordinary choices, as if consequence suddenly sat closer to the surface. A different route taken, a message not sent, a decision delayed, but this time with a strange gravity. It's not dramatic, but it's heavy, not loud, but unmistakable. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't instinct alone guiding the shift. Maybe the shift was already scripted, waiting for someone to breathe it into motion without even knowing why. There's always a pulse under the static, an invitation disguised as a coincidence. Did something flicker for just a second today? A thought that wouldn't leave? A pattern that felt too precise to ignore? Because that's the kind of signal this alignment tends to bring. Not the obvious kind, the kind that whispers, then waits. And for those born under a particular timestamp, don't worry, we'll get to that soon. This day doesn't just tap on the glass, it rearranges the room. But let's pause here. Think back. Was there a choice that felt heavier than usual, even if it made no sense in the moment? That might have been the hinge. Strange how ordinary actions sometimes hold the keys to the extraordinary. If something inside you felt still while watching this, it means you're aligning. Subscribe and stay close, because the transmission continues. There's a side of discipline no one likes to talk about. The part that waits in silence, watching quietly as others are celebrated for noise. What most misunderstand about this ancient regulator is its allegiance. It's not to the loud, the quick, or the lucky. It belongs to the hidden effort, the restraint in moments when eruption would have been easier. That kind of unseen labor builds a frequency that doesn't fade. It compacts, it stores, and then it returns. And when it does, it rarely arrives with fireworks. It slips in through overlooked doors, disguised as grace in ordinary things. So what happens when the scales finally shift? Sometimes a whisper means more than a shout. A door opens that wasn't even noticed before. A voice calls out that hadn't spoken in months. Not because of luck, but because the calibration demands it. Ever wonder what it means when a small thing suddenly lands with meaning? A message, a gesture, a look that feels like it finishes a sentence that was never spoken aloud. That's how correction feels when it favors the patient. This isn't a gift handed out for applause. It's a long-awaited echo, returning to where it always belonged. And maybe this is that moment. Are the signs already circling, or are they still approaching from the quiet edges? Either way, what's due doesn't stay hidden forever. Some moments arrive not to illuminate, but to strip away the leftover static from previous cycles. What's happening now isn't just an astronomical rhythm, it's a full system reset, one that doesn't ask for consent, only surrender. Beneath the silence of this moonless sky lies an energetic blackout, a sort of internal power outage designed to make space where clutter once lived. It's the kind of stillness that doesn't just pause the story, it deletes chapters. And when layered with that strict, slow-turning force of karmic gravity, the effect becomes deeper than emotional, it becomes cellular. There's a strange kind of emptiness that takes shape in this state. Not absence, but reformatting. Many have described the last 24 hours like standing in a hallway with no doors, motionless, suspended, as if some invisible transition is underway, but refuses to reveal its destination. The body reacts first, heavy, light, slow, restless. The mind follows with a vague ache for something unnamed. And what's left? A hollow pause that feels more spiritual than physical. Ever felt like something inside went quiet, but not in a peaceful way, more like a system shut down to reroute itself? That's not imagination. It's the void before renewal, the shadow before structure returns. And for those who've held strength too long, now is when that strength goes quiet, so something deeper can rise in its place. Isn't it strange how clarity often begins by taking everything away? If you understood even part of this, it means the signal is reaching you. Subscribe. The rest will make sense soon enough. Sometimes the stillness isn't emptiness, it's anesthesia. The kind that quiets surface thoughts so something deeper can speak. This particular silence carries the fingerprint of something ancient, something slow-moving but purposeful. It's not absence, it's preparation. What looks like disconnection is actually refinement. Saturn's influence tends to subtract first and explain later. It doesn't nudge, it redirects. And often that redirection feels like drifting off from a version of self that no longer matches the landscape being formed within. Memory may blur, attachments may lose color, and what used to feel urgent may suddenly dissolve into background static. That isn't failure, it's a quiet awakening. Lately, some have been catching fragments, words that don't feel thought, insights that arrive mid-motion, symbols that show up with eerie timing. These aren't tricks of the mind. They're the residual language of a deeper intelligence, rising now that the daily clutter has stepped aside. Ever experienced a day when the outside world felt muted, but the inner dialogue sharpened into something raw and unfamiliar? That's what this moment is built for. The thinning of identity is no accident. This is the ritual of shedding, one that begins not by reaching forward, but by remembering something timeless hidden underneath. The real voice doesn't rush. It waits until there's finally enough quiet to be heard. So, has that voice started whispering yet? Or is it still waiting for permission to return? Momentum is a strange illusion, especially when time itself is recalibrating. What feels like resistance right now might actually be precision unfolding behind a veil. This current stillness isn't punishment, nor is it proof of failure. It's timing, measured by a logic that doesn't answer to speed, but to structure. Some forces work like rivers, fast, loud, and easy to see. Others, like this one, move like roots under stone. Just because nothing has bloomed doesn't mean nothing has been planted. The difference is that this seed knows exactly when to break through, and it refuses to do so early, even if everything above it screams for progress. It's easy to mistake sacred delay for denial, but what if the delay is actually the signature of permanence? This moment isn't passive, it's coded. Think about it. Has there ever been a time when something arrived too early and then didn't last? That's what this energy is protecting against. Some intentions aren't denied. They're being sealed like messages placed in future-dated envelopes. There's a rhythm at work here, one that maps out around 9 weeks of quiet development. Frustrating? Sure, but also promising, because when it lands, it doesn't fade. That's the kind of shift this is, one that doesn't ask for faith, but insists on it. So here's the real question. If everything currently invisible is still alive and evolving beneath the surface, would it change the way this stillness feels? Would it feel more like trust and less like silence? Some days arrive without edges, no charge, no pull, just a muted presence that feels more like existing in a waiting room than walking through life. And when that feeling settles in, it's easy to question everything. Is something wrong? Is something missing? But what if that vacancy is an absence? It's procedure. There's a particular kind of silence that doesn't come from avoidance, but from orchestration. It clears the emotional palette because something precise is happening underneath. In this space, time doesn't feel linear. Reactions feel delayed. Thoughts feel disconnected from the body. But that's not drift, it's design. A deeper layer of consciousness has been sedated, not silenced. If you felt something here, like it was meant just for you, maybe it was. Subscribe. No need to explain it. Just stay. Right now, a quieter intelligence is working through the debris, the kind that doesn't need words to do its work. The detachment is not a malfunction, it's a safeguard. This is the audit phase, where things that once felt vital are being reviewed, questioned, maybe even removed without warning. The lack of emotional intensity is not because meaning has disappeared, it's because it's being redefined. Ever felt the sensation of being awake inside a dream, like watching a version of life without actually playing in it? That's this. Not because nothing is happening, but because too much is. And the conscious mind can't process the depth of it all at once. So the system goes quiet, not for retreat, but for realignment. And maybe, just maybe, the silence is louder than anyone wants to admit. Emotional stillness often feels like something's been shut off. But what if it's just the system entering recovery mode? This isn't collapse, it's recalibration. The circuitry of memory, time, and consequence is being rewired, and it requires silence to operate. What's unfolding isn't loud or bright, it's deliberate. A more grounded current is surfacing now, one that doesn't rush or distract. It simply hands over the archive, and it does so without flinching. Old moments begin replaying, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. Words thought forgotten resurface with new weight. Choices long buried feel fresh again, not to haunt, but to clarify. The past isn't knocking for permission, it's arriving to be seen with adult eyes. This reappearance of old timelines may not always emerge internally. Sometimes the mirror walks in wearing another face. Unexpected messages, encounters once closed off. Moments that feel designed to test composure. But they're not traps, they're signals. This is not about punishment, it's about integrity. How much of the unfinished story can now be met with honesty instead of shame? Has the moment finally come to see that even missteps were part of the architecture? When the light returns after this pause, the foundation it lands on will be newly cleared. So the question now is, when the memory appears, does it bring dread or does it bring a chance to breathe differently? Still thinking about what you just heard? That's not an accident. Subscribe. Let what's waking up in you keep unfolding. There's a specific kind of recognition that doesn't come with applause. It arrives like warm air after a long frost. The slow reveal of synchronicities, the unexpected ease where there was once resistance. That's the kind of shift now taking shape for those who've been quietly aligned. This isn't about grand gestures or external validation. It's about time finally responding to truth. When alignment has been maintained without witnesses, when values were held in private, choices made without guarantees, this moment becomes the return. A return not in noise, but in subtle currents. A delay lifts, A doorway reopens. A rhythm changes. Integrity isn't always rewarded in real time. Often it trails behind like a shadow that only catches up under the right light. That light just turned on. Those who've navigated with care, choosing clarity when comfort was easier, now begin to notice that their path is suddenly less obstructed, not because they forced it, but because the unseen forces finally finished their recalibration. Ever had a moment that didn't feel earned until much later? A chance meeting, a message delivered right when it was needed. That's not randomness, it's response, not to effort alone, but to consistency. And it's happening now, quietly but undeniably. So here's the invitation. Can the heart accept that the universe always saw, even when it said nothing? There are moments that don't just shape a day, they mark the pivot of an entire internal era. And while this alignment might look subtle from the outside, the architecture of reality is shifting for more than a few souls right now. A heavier chord is vibrating through the collective, and it's not random. For some, this vibration arrives like a tremor under the floorboards. Unsettling, but unmistakable. That's because the cycle has begun again. Those born in very specific windows are now stepping into a personal threshold disguised as pressure. It's not symbolic, it's structural. The soul begins asking real questions. What's solid? What's illusion? What can no longer be postponed? And the effect doesn't stop with them. When one enters the return, the field around them changes. Everyone nearby, friends, family, even strangers, feels the torque in the timeline. That's because this kind of transition acts like a magnet, pulling truth out of hiding. Some will let go of things they once swore they'd die holding. Others will finally do the thing that's been quietly calling for years. Either way, the script is being rewritten in real time. This isn't chaos, it's precision. Ever noticed how one person's transformation tends to ripple through a room? This is that, on a planetary scale. So here's something to consider. If life has recently become louder, sharper, or oddly quiet, could it be that someone near the epicenter just began remembering what they came here to do? Some alignments don't whisper. They resound through every subtle layer of being, setting the tone not just for the day, but for decades ahead. What unfolds now isn't coincidence, it's a signal. The absence of the moon and the emergence of Saturn create more than a mood. They write a timestamp across the energetic field. The atmosphere begins rejecting smallness. Half-truths dissolve on contact, and a strange internal urgency sets in, not driven by pressure to succeed, but by a realization. Pretending to be less is no longer an option. Systems are breaking, but not to fall apart, only to rebuild in alignment with what's real. And what's real? Sometimes it's the one who always drifted now waking with purpose. The person known for avoiding weight suddenly becomes a vessel for change. Meanwhile, the ones who look polished might start crumbling, not as punishment, but to finally touch the foundation. In this light, every choice made now begins to carry an echo, 30 years deep for some. The collective is shifting, and the pulse of that shift moves through mirrors. Individuals who are either stepping into embodiment or breaking under old scripts. The reckoning isn't cruel, it's clarifying. And that clarity may come wrapped in silence, solitude, or even stillness so sharp it feels like someone else is watching from the room. You're not here by mistake. If this felt like home, it probably is. Subscribe and stay where the deeper truths live. And maybe that's the strangest part, because it isn't imagination. Lately, a presence lingers in the spaces between thoughts, not as surveillance, but as remembrance. Certain numbers keep appearing. Time seems to sync up with unseen eyes. These aren't accidents. They're invitations, a repeated sequence, a lingering pause in front of a mirror, a sudden awareness of behavior mid-action. All these are part of the feedback loop, not to scare, but to support. After all, what if this isn't just a test? What if it's a time-stamped checkpoint, a cosmic prompt asking, are you still choosing to grow when no one's clapping? The more that's asked, the more is waiting. And no, it won't arrive as a shortcut. It will arrive as scaffolding, something unshakable to build on when everything else resets. Not every day demands action. Some demand stillness, of thought, of impulse, of old stories gasping for one last breath. This particular moment carries that kind of weight. It doesn't explode, it echoes. A sense of heightened awareness sits quietly under the skin, not screaming for attention, but making it impossible to ignore what's been left unfinished. The atmosphere feels thick with choice, though nothing visible seems to change. What shifts is subtler, perception sharpening, patterns reappearing, and emotional doorways cracking open, not to invite entry, but to remind that closure still matters. This isn't heaviness for the sake of heaviness. It's clarity being measured out in silence. And silence in this space is not emptiness, it's instruction. Some will wake to memories that don't feel theirs anymore. Faces that once burned with intensity now surface like faded echoes. That's not longing, that's evaluation. Saturn's current is exacting, not cruel. When certain names, places, or decisions rise again, it's not for reunion, it's for review. And there's a distinct difference between being drawn back and being asked to see clearly. Ever noticed how some moments appear just to test how far one has come? The loop calls, but the wise don't answer with the same voice. This portal doesn't offer a rewind. It offers a mirror. So the question becomes, if a version of life from another time calls out today, is it really the past calling? Or is it evolution waiting to be acknowledged? Some days don't ask for declarations. They ask for discipline of the unseen kind. Not the kind that requires effort, but the kind that requires restraint. There's a reason why this particular convergence of silence and structure carries a sacred charge. Words right now aren't simply expressed, they're etched. Thought becomes blueprint. Choice becomes architecture. The atmosphere behaves more like a vacuum than a channel, absorbing anything dropped into it with no promise of return. This isn't a threat, it's a responsibility. The energy doesn't reward performance, it honors presence. It registers intention far louder than volume. And the stiller the air, the more precisely it hears. In some lineages, days like this were met not with ritual noise, but with reverent stillness. Not out of fear, but out of respect for timing. What if clarity wasn't meant to be demanded, but revealed? What if the silence around this moment is not an absence, but an offering? Right now, the urge to define, to explain, to decide might be a trap. Meaning is in flux. Identity is being rewired. And speaking too soon could anchor the voice of an outdated self. So maybe the challenge isn't to figure it out, but to not interrupt. When the internal compass starts realigning, the wisest action is often observation. Can that be enough today? There's no instant breakthrough written into the sky. What's written is blueprint work, foundational, slow, exacting. Saturn doesn't rush, not because it's stubborn, but because it knows longevity isn't born in chaos. It's built in small, consistent truths. That's the tone of now. Heavy, yes, but also solid. That ache that's been sitting in the chest, that sense that something is happening, even though nothing looks different, that's not doubt, it's construction. This is the scaffolding phase, and legacy, the kind that sustains, is never loud in the beginning. It starts with a pause, a small shift in how one chooses to respond, a quiet decision to show up with more grace, more clarity, more self-respect. Saturn isn't recording outcomes. It's tracking integrity. Every restrained reaction, every unspoken judgment, every moment someone chooses presence over pattern adds weight to the next cycle's stability. And that's the true power of today. It's not about grand change, it's about honest change. Maybe the most karmic thing one can do right now isn't some radical leap, but a single intentional pause. To not argue back, to not chase clarity, to not rush grief, to not break the silence before it finishes speaking. So here's a final reflection. If the only action today is a quiet promise to become just a bit more aligned than yesterday, wouldn't that already be enough to shift a whole timeline? And if this resonates, thank you for staying with it. If the quiet spoke louder than expected, feel free to leave a thought below or simply rest in the stillness this moment asked for. And if more insights like this feel right for the season you're in, consider subscribing. Until next time, may your next choice be the truest one.